Hello, today is February 13th, 2023. Welcome to the Freedom Farming and Living Podcast. This is episode 6, Growing All the Things. My name's Robin, I'm your host. So, growing all the things. That's a thing a lot of people tell you, don't do it. Don't try to grow all the things and raise all the things. And essentially what they're referring to is the desire to get into homesteading, and maybe you start with some chickens and then you move into another animal, and then you want another animal and another one, and as you get deeper into it, you discover that you want all of it. You want to have fresh milk, you want to have your own bacon, you want to have grass-fed lamb, you want to have your own turkey for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so instead of just having your simple chickens and getting that all worked out, you start diving into all these other animals before you're ready for that. And so that's why people say don't rush, don't try to don't try to grow all the things and raise all the things. This is also true on the gardening standpoint. So I mentioned animals. This also works on, of course, the growing side of things in the garden. Maybe start out with a couple of tomato plants, maybe some pepper plants, maybe some cucumbers. And then before you know it, you're staring at 4 boxes slam full of all these different seeds that you want to grow. Because when you were going through the Baker Creek catalog or online looking through Johnny Seeds, you just see all these different things, or you watch the YouTube video and you got a list of all the different things that some YouTuber is growing, and then you want to grow the same thing because it looks amazing. And it is amazing. But it is very easy to overextend yourself. So again, this is why you'll hear from really experienced homesteaders, don't rush. Don't try to do too much. Get good at one thing and then move on to the next. Now, while I agree with that, I also believe it, like so many other things in life and in homesteading, the answer really lies more in it depends, because it depends on who you are. If you have the capability, I mean, if you have the money to just spend your way into all the infrastructure you need, then getting set up is going to be a whole lot easier than if you're having to piecemeal it together as you go, using and repurposing scrap items. That's going to slow the progress of how well you can build infrastructure to handle all these new animals. Likewise, excuse me, there are quite a number of, I don't want to say automated, but somewhat automated systems that can make chores for animals, chores for your garden easier, right? I mean, drip irrigation. Well, if you have your entire garden, all these gardens you have set up on drip irrigation versus someone who maybe has to go out and hand water or move a sprinkler from here to there to over there, and that's a two totally different budgets that might be able to allow one person with a bigger budget to do more in a same amount of time as someone with a smaller budget. Now, you can't completely buy your way into doing whatever you want to do, but certainly if you have the resources available, or if you're already on an established area where you have a whole lot of infrastructure that's on your property, then that's going to really shorten the curve at which you have to take on your path to growing all the things and raising all the things. So, in our own situation, we started gardening a little over 3 years ago. raising animals shortly thereafter. We're coming up on 3 years from that first trip to the feed store and coming home with 6 chicks. So in that 3 year period of time, which is a pretty short period of time, really and truly, we have essentially got into every animal there is on the livestock. Let's say the normal. If you listen to my introduction, introductory episode, you'll know I listed off all the animals we have. So the highlights of that is we have poultry, several different kinds. We have pigs, goats, sheep, and a milk cow, and a livestock guardian donkey as well as a livestock guardian dog. So we are able to produce a good bit of food. Now, in our gardening standpoint, we have our annuals. We have raised beds. Currently, we have 4. I have 6. No, I take that back. We have 6, and I have 6 more I have to finish building. I have all the material, but because I travel around the country a lot, it's one of those backburnered things that the wood's there. I just have to find the time. One of the things that was holding us up was some trees that we had that needed to come down before we expanded, because we didn't want to have any damage occur. Plus, we're putting in a water filtration system, a whole home. I say whole home, but it's really, in our case, whole property water filtration system. So it'll dechlorinate, um, filter out, metals and lots of different stuff. It's a rhino system. So I have to put up a little insulated shed for it right there in our raised bed area, which it'll be a dual purpose shed. It'll be for garden tools and for our water filtration system. And then that way our raised beds can be watered with non-chlorinated water we tried those little attachments you can buy at the store. You can order on Amazon. Screw it on the end of the garden hose and it dechlorinates. Of course, it slows your water flow down significantly. So if you're trying to use a spray nozzle, it's not going to work very good. So winter comes around, if you don't remember to get them off of there and get them inside, they're going to crack, or they get knocked over and they get cracked. Animal or a kid or something happens and something gets dropped on them, they get cracked. They worked briefly, but the the big use for them was basically popping it on the end of the hose that we used for watering our goats. In a rotational system, moving around, it didn't work really good there. And then same thing with the gardens, going from one area to another. Unless you want to buy a dozen of these for all your garden hoses around your property, it's not a really good system. That's why we invested in this Rhino system to cover our whole property. So that is one thing that needs to go in before the rest of these raised beds do. And of course, I wasn't going to build a shed underneath a tree that needed to come down. Also, not going to put a very expensive water system, filtration system in this building where we've got pecan trees that are dropping limbs left and right because they self prune, storms come through, they're dropping limbs. So besides the fact that we were, had our beds being shaded out, the damage coming from those limbs falling was also another point of concern. So they're gone. We got one more tree that has to go where a couple of the other beds are, and it could still potentially drop a limb if it fell the right way and could hit that shed. So we're going to wait till that last tree comes down, and then I'll be able to go ahead and put that water filtration shed in. And then mostly from a cosmetic point, because it is in our front yard, it's right on the road. So we want it to look decent because we do have a lot of visitors come by. We have homeschool children will come by on tours. We have some other people that stop by just shopping at our farm stand, basically, as well as checking out the operation, seeing what animals we have and what we're doing. Um, it's plus we just want it to look nice from our own purposes. So, given that, we want to put that shed, in the central point of the raised bed area, and then build out from it. So that's a project that's going to take a couple of times. I was hoping to have it done by spring, and I still might be able to, depending on how my workload falls out. But obviously, spring is rapidly approaching, so it's going to be close. Now that takes care of that's our raised bed area. We do annuals there. We have quite a few green stalks. We have some different herbs growing in. We'll do, we've got some mint and some different things, and maybe do some strawberries in them. My wife does some flowers in them as well. We have a couple of elevated herb gardens, kitchen adjacent herb gardens. So that's handy. Of course, better walk out and harvest from them. And then we have our greenhouse that, of course, we have seed starting that initially takes place in our microgreens area inside the house. But then the starts will go out to the greenhouse before they then go out to the raised beds. And of course, we keep some fruit trees. We overwinter in there. And then we have a handful of other things that'll grow in there in the spring and fall. Summer, it gets so hot here. Even with the sides rolled up and the doors open, it's still really hot, and with the shade cloth, of course, as well. So there's not a whole lot that we do actual growing in there. It's really more for extending our growing season. And of course, overwintering those things that just for those handful of days that we get cold enough by some fluke ice storm situation that will kill off some of the things that aren't fully established, younger fruit trees. And we do have a little food forest we're working on. It's primarily orchard and berry bushes, some grapevines, and then some perennials, asparagus. And we have some flowers that get planted as well, just from a pollination standpoint. So we have quite a few things going on around this property. And then one of our new lease properties is where our market garden is going to go. So that's going to be a new enterprise for us this spring. It's the first bed's prepped, so we'll see how that goes. But we really accelerated more on the livestock side of things than the gardening side of things. But we did kind of make that switch pretty quick on the gardening side. We went from having just a couple of herb beds and planted a few things in some grow bags, which that's the other thing I didn't mention. All down our greenhouse, we have rows of grow bags for potatoes and different things like that where it makes sense to do it in a grow bag. And so we went from just the grow bags and a couple little green stalks and a couple of elevated herb beds. We had a few things in the ground, but not much, to 6 raised beds with 6 more ready to go. I just ran out of time to get them at least put together partially. They're the materials there, so I could have put together a lot of the skeleton of each one, waiting for the trees to get cut, and that didn't happen. But I've got it down pretty well. This is a Justin Rhodes raised bed. A little bit of a tweaking to it because I'm using rough cut, true cut lumber. So I had to tweak the design a little bit to fit for true cut, true 2x4s instead of your dimensional cuts. That wasn't a whole lot to it, but it was something that had to be worked out so that it would fit. Now, on the livestock thing, yes, we very much took off with it. We did have some people rehome some things here where they were moving to livestock's not allowed, or some people had, they lost all but one duck and asked if we would take their duck, and same thing happened with somebody else. And we've had a few things like that, but mostly it's us just looking at what we're doing and growing more. Primarily, that started too with the fact that we were just going to be growing food for ourselves, just your typical homestead. But our community doesn't have access to a lot of homestead folks around here. And so we had a ton of people express interest in what we were growing and what we were raising. And because of that, we wanted to give our community access to what we were doing. Well, of course, the only way to do that is to scale up. So instead of just having we started with 6 chicks. Shortly thereafter, we added a couple of more. So we had our 8 chickens, and we decided, okay, we'll scale up. So we doubled it, then we doubled it again, and we doubled it again. So yeah, it's we just had 40 chicks hatch out of a batch of 60, which is not a great hatch, but these were also eggs that came from a couple other homesteads. Of course, as we've started homesteading more, we did find other people that were doing it a little further out from us, but not too far. So we brought on some eggs from them because, of course, this was winter. Our chickens weren't laying as many eggs. Now they're back up on their production really good. So this next batch that we incubate will be a full batch of our own eggs. So it'll be interesting to see if we have any difference in our hatch rate. Now, of course, we did have 7 that didn't even develop at all early on. So that those were not developing at all. So they were clearly not even fertile or not fertilized. So the egg market, of course, has been really good for us. It's not financially the best thing in the world. If you're raising chickens and selling eggs, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it has opened the door to a lot of our other products. And that's another area where we've scaled up, uh, partially for our own desires, but again, because of the interest from the community. And that's in our dairy goats. We started out with 2, and then, of course, had to get 2 more because we knew that we needed to have a companion for each of them, because we had a male and female we bought from one farm, then we bought a male from another farm, and we ended up picking up 2 pregnant females from another farm. So we really were only going to have 4, but we ended up with 5. And it was a pretty great setup. We had milk for ourselves, um, had a couple of babies, were able to sell them off. We retained one so that we did increase our herd, but the rest we sold. And so the selling of them helped pay for some of the initial setup of that herd. And then we started making soap and lotions and bath bombs and all these different goat milk products. And so, of course, there was a big interest in them, and got to have more goat milk. So our herd has tripled from the original herd that we intended on having. But it's worked really good. We have plenty of milk. We do have a milk cow now too, because we have pigs that we want to make sure that we can give them protein access and not have to be strapped to the store that's 45 minutes away to get feed. So yeah, it's really easy to just kind of snowball out of control. Um, but if you manage it properly, and I'm not saying we have, because there have been plenty of mistakes that we've made, plenty of times where it was maybe we need to get rid of the ducks, or not the ducks. We love the ducks. The geese, maybe the turkeys, the guineas. We don't really need them. They're kind of aggravating. Um, so we made our way through it though. Um, we did get rid of the quail. We had quail in with our rabbits, and we just weren't feeling the quail. It's not to say we won't go back to them eventually, but we prefer, because we were selling some quail eggs, but it wasn't really working out. If I was here more often, where I could actually focus on growing those quail out and then processing them, and us having a steady supply of eggs that we were incubating, might would be a different story. But we'd rather just take all that energy, focus on the rabbits. We have tons of rabbit sales, from meat rabbits, pet rabbits, breeders, different sales in the rabbit arena. And so, because of that, we just would rather take that square footage that was being used by the quail and utilize it for the rabbits. Again, down the road, that may change, and certainly we're open to if it does. Um, but when you look at, and not to say that you can't feed quail, you certainly probably could, but we find it easier just to say, okay, we're getting our eggs from our ducks and our chickens. They're living on the ground. We can give them scraps. Whereas with the quail, we're having them living in cages up off the ground. And so bringing them feed, and I'm sure you probably could, but I'm not sure on feeding scraps to quail. Whereas I know with chickens, we can bring them all kinds of, different scraps. I know that we could give them milk, and it's going to take care of their protein needs, and it's going to have, calcium covered for them as well. With quail, I mean, I'm not saying you can't feed them milk, but that's not something you typically hear about. So I just think that, for us, it made more sense to stick with the chicken eggs and the duck eggs. We love our duck eggs. We eat those before we ever touch our chicken eggs. So if you haven't tried duck eggs, I would highly recommend that, because they are excellent. Great for baking, but I love to just eat them in place of eating regular chicken eggs. I just eat scrambled duck eggs, fried duck eggs, doesn't matter, boiled. I'm good with all of it. So again, you can grow all the things and raise all the things and do all the things, but have a plan. Have a pretty good plan. Have a really good plan, actually. Have a plan that you're pretty certain won't fail. More than likely, you're going to have some chinks in that armor, and you're going to find them as you go along. But if you really cover all your bases, then at least you can manage them a lot more easily. Now, of course, it's easy to say that, um, but it's another thing to actually implement it. So, for sure, if you can focus on one or two animals before you move on to the next one, it definitely makes a lot of sense. But of course, one of the big things I would say is, rather than spending all your time in the evenings, or your free time, dedicate some of that free time that's normally would be spent going out or doing this or doing that, and research your next animal or your next two animals. Start planning out where they're going to go, start working on the infrastructure, and that way you can make that leap quicker. And that's kind of what we did with our situation. Is we went ahead and started setting up what we knew we were going to get. Now, to be honest, most cases we weren't completely all the way set up when we got them, but because we already had other animals, we had goats being kept in by cattle panels. So there were some areas that when our pigs went over there, they actually didn't get out because they were already being held in by, they were big enough that they weren't going out. They were no longer little piglets that could squeeze through the bottom of the cattle panel. So there's certainly, some things that you can get away with, but I will say that it definitely makes it a lot tougher if you don't have exactly what you need in place. So definitely work on those types of things if you want to jump into some things and you want to jump into it quickly. The fact of the matter is, when we started doing this 3 years ago, well, I was 40 years old, almost 41. Well, I mean, that was 2020. So I was on my way to 41. I didn't want to spend 10 years building up to everything we wanted to do. If I was 21, I probably would be fine spending 10 years doing it. I don't know. I probably still would have been kind of in a hurry, even at that age. But definitely at an older age, I wanted to get things set up quicker. And especially when we started seeing that what we could do for the community, and that, hey, wait a minute, make a we can make a business out of this. Maybe I can get off the road eventually. Not tomorrow, of course, but if we can scale up here and there, figure out what the market's like. There's no market research for where we're at. You're going to have to do the market research yourself. You're going to have to get out there and sell some stuff and find out if it's going to work. Talk to people, see what it is they're interested in. That's what we've done. Meat, chickens, lamb. We talk to the community, see what people are interested in. Do they want cut ups? Do they want lamb chops, leg of lamb, things of that nature, as opposed to half a lamb, a whole lamb? We were able to go out and find out that hey, we're gonna have to get a private label because most people want retail cuts. They don't want a half a lamb or a whole lamb. We do have some people that want that, but most people that we talk to love lamb and want lamb, but they want to be able to buy it like if they were going to the grocery store. So of course, I mean, that's fine. No problem with that. It just puts an extra layer of dealing with it because there's not someone local that handles lamb. Definitely not an inspected place. So we do have to travel a couple hours for that. What's that going to look like on the cost? What's the inelasticity issues that may pop up when we are pricing these? So these are things that we have to work out on a small pilot run, and then we can see, hey, will this make sense to scale it or will it not? And so that's where we're at. We scaled up because of what we could provide to the community, not just ourselves. So just beware if this is something that you're thinking about. If you're in that beginning phase and you're excited and you see what people have and they're doing this and they're doing that, that's very easy to go after that. And by all means, I'm not saying don't do it, but just be aware that it's very easy to have a couple of animals and then it turns into this almost disaster. Same would be the case in a garden area. You might start off planting a couple of rows of something and then go, wow, I want to this is great, but I want to grow more food. I want to grow all these different things. And if you are out there taking care of a 400 square foot garden or a 200 square foot garden, and then all of a sudden you jack it up to 1,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet, that's going to be a significant difference. Weeding, dealing with your harvest times. It's one thing to go out and harvest a few plants here or there, but when you're having to go out and harvest several rows of stuff, And of course, this is where succession planting comes into play. Of course, don't run out and plant 50 tomato plants or 50 pepper plants or some large number without doing some succession planting on it, because you may have a few plants that you're used to dealing with, and sometimes you may not even have the production level, the fertility right, and all of a sudden, you get the fertility right, and you have a really good harvest, and that's amazing. And then the one of the big issues could be if you scale up on your gardening and you either get the fertility really right or you get it really wrong. That could have potential negative side effects both ways. So have a plan, and then it will make doing this scale up, increasing the diversity of all the things you're doing, a lot easier task to not only perform but excel in. And then, as a side note, of course, I did an episode about low input chicken feed a couple episodes back. That's another thing about when you start scaling up animals. Buying a bag of chicken feed here or there for half a dozen or so chickens, it's really not that big a deal. I mean, if you're not paying attention to the numbers, it's almost like it doesn't even cost anything. Also, if you're feeding food scraps, you're going to have a skewed misunderstanding of what your actual cost is going to be when you scale up, when you start adding these other animals, right? So even if you don't scale up on your chickens, but you add ducks and geese and turkeys and guineas, like we did. Of course, we added those after we were scaled up our chickens. Well, the ducks we added early on. We had ducks shortly after having chickens, so we've pretty much had chickens and ducks almost from the start. We added the geese and the turkeys and the guineas later on. But there's not enough food scraps to go around for that many animals unless you have a household of 50 people. You're just not going to generate enough scraps. So it's very easy to say, well, yeah, I only buy one bag of chicken feed every 2 weeks or 3 weeks for the 4 or 5 chickens I have here. So this isn't bad. But when you double the number of chickens or you triple the number of chickens, or if you add, geese and turkeys, you're not going to have that ratio of food scraps to feed for your geese and your turkeys and your ducks and your guineas. They're going to be all on feed. I mean, yeah, you can free range them. They're going to pick up some stuff, free ranging. But you're going to have a lot more feed expenditure related to those birds than your first initial batch. And whatever it is, whether you started with ducks or turkeys or chickens or whatever that first bird is that you're feeding scraps to is going to have a lower cost per bird than excuse me, I'm really, my throat having some problems today. But yeah, those first birds, they're going to have a lot lower per bird feed cost than every other thing that you add after that, because you just won't have the feed scraps for it. So bear that in mind too. That's one of the kind of unforeseen things related to not just your feed cost, but your feed store trips or your deliveries of feed, depending on how you go about that. This extra time you're spending running back and forth to the feed store. And again, if you're anywhere in any kind of remote area, that can really be a major pain. I mean, for us, it's 45 minutes each way to the closest feed store. That's not when we go, we got to make it count. We don't try to just run up there and go grab something every week or a couple days a week. We try to make it a once a month, maybe twice a month. For most of the time, though, we really want to keep it to once a month. We fill up a trailer, get our hay, get feed, salt, and try to just get it all covered in one shot. Because again, it's such an ordeal to go. I mean, it's 45 minutes, but it's not an hour and a half trip. It's an hour and a half on the road. By the time you get there and go get everything and go to the back, get loaded up. Oh well, it's lunchtime. We're gonna run and grab something to eat real quick while we're here because we don't come here very often, and it's a 4 or 5 hour ordeal when it's all said and done. You waste almost a whole day, and so you don't want to do that every week. Definitely don't want to do it twice a week. So don't really just focus too much on just your infrastructure things. Don't focus on just the monetary things. You want to take it all into account. How is this all going to work? And if you are really, really set on, growing these different things in addition to what you're already doing, or raising, some of these other animals, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Just be aware that you could get overwhelmed by it and do your best not to. You can overcome it. Worst case scenario, and this is one of the best things, is before you buy your animals, have your how am I going to eat these animals already in place. So if you're getting birds, you don't have to get a chicken plucker, right? You can skin a chicken, skin a turkey. I had a turkey, unfortunately, got stuck his head in with the pigs when they were eating, and his neck got clipped. So of course I went ahead and killed him because he was bleeding out, but he wasn't all the way. He was basically suffering. So I grabbed him, threw him in a kill cone. Just fortunately have him set up right there nearby, and bled him out. He was young. I mean, he was supposed to have been for Thanksgiving. This was last summer, so he was nowhere near where he needed to be. I wasn't going to go pull this. We use a crawfish pot for our scalding, but I wasn't going to get that set up, get the plucker out for one bird, and not even a full bird either. This is a junior turkey, so I just skinned him, and we had a really small turkey for dinner. But bear in mind that if you get in this situation where you get into some turkeys or you get into geese, and either A, you don't like it, or B, something happens where an instance like this, they die of a disease or they get sick, yeah, you won't want to eat that animal. But if it's something happens where somehow it breaks its leg, or another animal hurts it somehow, how are you going to deal with that animal? You don't just throw it away. You don't just turn it into compost. I mean, you could, but that's a waste. The other thing is, and this is where I would say those situations are more of a kind of an emergency deal. But how about if you go, I'm not interested in this animal anymore, or this animal's costing me more money than I realized, or it's just not fitting in our system. I need to get rid of it. Well, you could potentially sell it, but while you're waiting to try to sell it, it's still eating feed. But if you have it set up and you say, okay, I've got these 5 geese here. They're aggravating me. They're eating too much, whatever the case is. Well, again, you could skin them, but I mean, goose fat's going to be the skin and the fat. They don't have much fat. And if you skin them, what little bit they have is going to be gone. Same thing with a duck. I mean, it's one of the greatest things, right? Is duck fat. But if you skin it, bye-bye fat. You're going to have some left, but it's going to be very little. So having a plucker, having a scalder, having a plucker, great things. Do you have to have them? No, you don't have to have them. You can pluck them by hand. I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, for one bird, sure, but if you're buying a flock of something, be a good idea to have a plucker, or have a friend that has one. Know somebody you can rent one from. Something. Have an end game set up so that if you decide after going, I'm growing all the things and raising all the things, that some of these things need to go, you know how you're going to get rid of them, right? If you buy some pigs and all of a sudden they keep breaking out and you can't handle it, or they're eating more feed, or whatever. You lose your job or something. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that could happen to where you go, I need to get rid of this animal. And you might be able to sell it, but you might not be able to sell it. So if you can't sell it, what are you going to do with it? I mean, if it's a financial issue, you lost your job, taking it up to the processor might not be the best bet. Now, if you don't know how to process it, then certainly that may be your only option. But have those things already in place. You don't want to get side-swiped by life and then get head on with the situation where you have these animals and you have no idea what you're going to do with them, and you're scrambling. And when you're in a rush like that, in a hurry, in a bind, that's when you make poor choices. So to sum this all up, I would say, should you grow all the things? Should you raise all the things? It depends. It depends on you. It depends on your situation. It depends. So you have to take stock of yourself. You know who you are. There's some people that go, yeah, there's no way I should grow all the things or raise all the things. I won't be able to handle it. I can't multitask that well. If systems aren't perfectly set up, if I'm not competent and confident in what I'm doing. Whereas others, hey, I fly by the seat of my pants. I thrive under pressure. I can juggle all kinds of things. I'm up for the challenge. Know who you are, know what you're capable of, and by all means, get out of your comfort zone a little bit. Don't go crazy, but you can push the envelope a little bit. Take on maybe an extra thing that you want to do, but you're afraid to do it. Do your research, gain the knowledge, talk to people that have them, find out what you may be missing, and then take that next step forward. And then what I've found is the more of those steps you take forward, the easier it is to keep taking steps forward. So if you have a long-term goal of wanting to have 3 or 4 other animals, pig, sheep, cow, something like that, some bigger animals, even if you start with an animal that you might not necessarily want to have a whole bunch of, if you go from chicken to cow, that's, maybe a pretty big step for some people. Of course, the other great thing is if you have a cow, you can pretty much feed your chickens milk, lots and lots of milk and whey. You have that option for taking care of your laying hens. Also taking care of pig. I mean, there's lots of things, but checking out what somebody else is doing in person. You can watch YouTube and you can pick up a good bit from that, but boy, you can't beat going to actually put yourself on someone's farm and see it in person. That will give more experience than a weekend of watching YouTube, is actually being there and seeing the good, the bad, the ugly, talking to the person. They can tell you, I did this, I tried that. These are things we run into. See this right here. This is what works for us. Go do that. That right there will give you so much more than, that's some real research right there. That is going to be the best research. That'll get you to where you need to be to make that step. Maybe a little bit faster than you're comfortable with until you go do it. If you're not real comfortable, but you want to make that step, get to a farm, see what they're doing, even if you got to drive an hour. We drive an hour to farms all the time. It's worth it. You get to see what other people are doing. You gain so much from them. And the other thing is you build a network, and support their business, support their farm. If they're selling plant starts, buy a few plant starts. If they're selling, if they've got, beef or chicken in the freezer, by all means, definitely buy that. It's much better than going to the grocery store for sure. For the longest time, we were driving 2 hours to get our chicken and beef. Now, sometimes we were able to tie that in with other things we were doing, but not always. It didn't always work out that way. But it was worth supporting another farm. They're a regenerative ag farm. That's what we're focused on. And we've built a really good relationship with them. And so we have the potential of maybe breeding stock, sending business, each other's way if it comes down to it. If someone's out of something, I mean, we're a long ways away from each other, but again, we already make trips over that way for other purposes and find ourselves over there anyhow. So because of that, it definitely makes sense going by there. I have family in the area, so it's one of those things where the cost of gas and the time, yeah, it's there, but it's not as big of a deal as a normal 2 hour, well, about an hour and 45 minute, but hour and 45 minute trip really sounds like, because of the fact that we go there anyway. But find those ones around you. Find them and go get some experience, get boots on the ground. And again, I'm not saying go grow all the things and raise all the things, but I am saying that just because everybody's telling you not to doesn't mean that for you it makes sense not to. You may be like we are and capable of it. And again, if that is you, don't get discouraged if you end up with some problems, because that's going to happen. That will happen. So best of luck. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the episode. I hope you'll follow along with everything we've got coming up, and hopefully I will continue to get better at this as we go along. Thank you and God bless.